to do a countdown this time. Hello and welcome to Insurrection with Brenton Lengel, formerly carried on the Starcom radio network, now carried on YouTube because deadlines are hard, and so is radio. And I much prefer just doing random stuff like this. I am your host, Brenton Lengel. For those of you who don't know me, if you're just joining us, I am a poet, playwright, former activist with Occupy Wall Street, and Ringo Award-nominated comic creator of Snow White Zombie Apocalypse, fourth issue of which is out and shipping. Hopefully we'll get to you before Halloween. And my most recent title, Durruti, Shadow of the People. This is not the comic. This is one of the 7 books I read on the Spanish Civil War and the life of anarchist Buenaventura Durruti to write that series. And I am joined with the host of, sorry, not the host, radio of mine. I am joined with the admin of a page called Socrates Memes. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Awesome. Do you want to introduce yourself? Talk a little bit about the page?
Yeah, so I run a page called Socrates Memes. This is the first time any of my followers have heard my voice. I've been pretty anonymous, and I'm still anonymous now without my face because I'm not quite ready to put it out there yet. But
that's all right. For viewers of Insurrection with Brenton Lengel, especially if they've been watching my series where we do a chapter-by-chapter breakdown of Homage to Catalonia, my co-host, Bobby B, has a similar affliction where he's just a disembodied voice.
Well, okay, I'm glad I'm not alone. Yeah, I mean, my page, I post sub-memes. I post my thoughts a lot that aren't memes. My political positions vary depending on who you ask. According to my right-wing followers, I'm a communist. According to my left-wing followers, I'm a neoliberal. So I kind of straddle that line.
That's wonderful because neoliberal is the worst thing you can be to a left-winger. Yeah. And of course, a communist is the worst thing you can be to a right-winger.
Exactly.
And most people, and almost no one uses those terms correctly. So
exactly. Yay. Cool. Yeah, no, but I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me. Today and yesterday I had a lot of posts about anarchism, and I decided that the best path forward would be to actually have a good discussion with somebody about it rather than having internet debates in comments.
Yeah, that's a very good idea. And yeah, I saw it. So I don't even know how I started following your page, but I saw that you had put out a post about like anarchists, like what is, in your opinion, the weakest part of your ideology or something like that. Yes. And I answered. And shortly after I answered, I think you turned my answer into a meme. Yeah, because I mentioned 2 things that I think are inherent weaknesses of anarchism, or maybe the 2 biggest weaknesses in my head. There's maybe one other, but that's less with the theory and just more with actual practice. Is that I think anarchism would have a hard time keeping like blood feuds from going on and on for generations, because you're not channeling grievances through a state apparatus.
Yes. Okay, that was your comment. Okay, I was trying to remember.
Yeah, that was one. And then the other one was that I am skeptical of decentralized stateless anarchism's ability to respond to a pandemic like COVID. And so that had a lot of that's caused a lot of problems for me. I'm still an anarchist, but I think that those are fair criticisms. So I saw that you made a couple memes about that, and then you said you wanted to have a dialogue with an intelligent anarchist, and instead you got me. So I'm sorry. So let's talk a little bit, because anarchism is a fascinating ideology. It takes a lot just to wrap your head around it, especially if you're coming from a liberal background. So why don't you, I guess, give me some of your thoughts on it, and I guess I can give you some my perspective.
Sure. Yeah. So I guess I wanted to start by quickly saying what I'm not saying. I think a lot of people on my page have this impression that I don't like anarchist goals, or I don't like them, or I don't like other facets of anarchism. And that's not what I've been saying or have been saying on my page. My big argument that I've been making on my page is kind of this 2-pronged disjunction where I argue that either anarchism is not a practical political theory to deal with a world of 8 billion people with massive global issues, Or when people respond to that critique, they then redefine anarchy in such a way that it becomes so broad as to be almost impossible to disagree with, in which case it really doesn't mean much. And so I think that kind of the two-pronged approach I've been trying to push, maybe not well, that I've been responding to my followers pushing.
So you're essentially going with the head in the clouds utopian theme on one hand, or kind of the Spinoza's God argument on the other, where it's so broad it doesn't apply.
Yes, I think that's a very good way of putting it. I find that some anarchists I've been talking to pull the Spinoza and they give me a definition that I'd be insane to disagree with.
Yeah, and if I can ask you, by the way, have the anarchists that you're talking to, what have they identified themselves as? Have they just said, I'm an anarchist? Have they used like the phrase have they used the phrase black flag anarchist? Have they identified a specific school, mutualism, communism, syndicalism, or like, do any of them say they're anarcho-capitalists? That's really what
so I have plenty of, I don't know, it sounds like you haven't followed my page very long. I have a whole history of attacking anarcho-capitalists and libertarians as a separate ideology. So
yes, that
is not who I'm talking about here. I think I wouldn't even go on a live stream to talk to them because there's no reason for me to do it.
I have argued with ANCAPs like consistently since 2014. I did it so long, I eventually fought the final boss and debated Dr. David D. Friedman on Modern Day Debate.
Oh. Okay,
wow. Yeah, so I've talked to those people a lot. They are the father of a number of ulcers.
Yes, so I have plenty of debates on my page. I don't really feel the need to discuss these intellectual issues with them.
There's not much to discuss.
Right, exactly. And I will say, I'll just qualify this. I'm a big fan of Nozick. Like, I like reading his philosophy. I don't agree with it, but like, I think there are some smart libertarian thinkers that I just wholly disagree with.
I would agree. Honestly, David D. Friedman's a lovely guy. I disagree with him, but he's probably the best example of them that I've met. Hence why I say he's the final boss.
Exactly, yeah. So I just did that other caveat that a lot of them I talk to on the internet, not worth discussing with, but there are some smart intellectual libertarians and ANCAPs that I would talk to. So I don't think my followers always or often just identify themselves when they comment, and that's usually who I'm talking to on this because I have a lot of comments on my page. But I get the sense that it's a lot of ANCOMs, anarcho-syndicalists, mutualists. I get a bunch of them. I get a variation, and it's hard to determine which one is which when I'm responding to a comment.
Yeah. Okay, so can you get a little bit more specific about the critiques? Because those are very, very general, and I have answers for both of those, but can you give me an example of maybe someone saying something that you totally wouldn't disagree with, but is so broad it doesn't apply?
Yeah, I guess we can start with that then. So I think one of the comments today made me push that objection pretty hard, which was that they started saying, hey, we would have, you can have some hierarchies, just not unjust hierarchies, right? So we would have this direct democracy system, and we'd appoint people. We'd have like the farmer in charge of the farmers and the medic in charge of the medics, and they'd all appoint each other.
Which goes straight back to Mikhail Bakunin's "What is Authority?" when he says, what is authority? Does it follow that I reject all authority? Perish the thought. In the matter of boots, I defer to the authority of the bootmaker.
Yes. So, and that's a common response I get, and I understand that they're not rejecting expertise. Like, they believe experts have good knowledge, and that makes sense to me. But then this person I started asking, okay, once you have this direct democracy system, how are the rules decided? And he says by a majority vote. In which case, I'm saying, isn't that then the majority oppressing the minority? Isn't that just tyranny of the majority? And have you really dodged the issue here? And how do you hold the minority accountable? And I'm sure that anarchists have responded to this.
I have like 8 responses all ready to go right
exactly.
now. But
I just want to I guess I'll say this up front because I know my followers say this about me all the time. I am not claiming to be an expert on anarchism. My expertise is the law, the current law, and just how rules and system of laws are structured. So I'm not well read in anarchism, and I won't pretend to be. So I'm happy, and that's why I wanted to come on with someone who could help educate me as well as discuss these issues. I'm not trying to pretend like I have the answers to everything here. So that's what jumped out at me. And so I'd be interested in hearing your response to that and what anarchists say about it.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely give you a response to that. So first off, so just to undergird this before I get into, I guess, the direct response to that is oftentimes when I as an anarchist have this dialogue with non-anarchists or with anarchists who are maybe don't understand the theory that well, don't understand the political tradition. A lot of the time we will run into a situation like this because a lot of them will come up to me and be like, what are the universal rules of anarchism? Like how do we produce the wages? How does this work? And I'm just like, what rules? There's no state. There can't, like you're talking about laws, for instance.
Yes.
Like laws, at least in anarchist society, the way that we understand them today is that these are pieces of public policy created by governmental bodies and enforced by state violence. And this is what's really, really important to understand is like if there's no force behind it, it's not really like a law. It's a suggestion.
Yeah, but I mean, I've spoken to some anarchists, and maybe correct me if you don't agree with this. I've heard that plenty of anarchists who do agree with enforcement, they would just say community enforcement, for example.
Yeah, as opposed to state enforcement.
Exactly.
Yeah, so
just to throw in, I mean, at some point, I also get worried that now to pull up Nozick, you get this it suddenly created a state out of a non-state, which is also, I believe, sometimes could be an issue here.
Yeah. Well, also with Nozick, I don't know about Nozick's specific criticism, but usually when right libertarians critique the state, they're really talking about government. They actually love the state. Right. Which is, so this is what we have to understand. So the state and the government in anarchist philosophy are not the same thing. Government is something that we do. It could be an institution, but like even an anarchist GA, a General Assembly, like what we did at Occupy Wall Street, where everybody in the community gets together and votes and uses consensus process. That's government. We are doing government as we do it because
it's governance as a verb almost.
Yeah, it is. So government in anarchist philosophy is essentially like the whatever institution happens to exist within a society for the creation and mediation of public policy. And that can take many forms, and anarchists can have any attitude towards it from like hatred, like, and opposition if it's a particularly disgusting government, to support, to just total what's a blasé attitude where we just don't care.
Sure.
What anarchists are most concerned about, however, is the state, and the state is not it's not the government, it's not the city council, it is as defined by Max Weber,
it's the monopoly of violence.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
Now I have a little bit of a caveat to the Max Weber definition. This is mine in particular. Okay. I don't know if any other major anarchist philosophers have made this particular distinction, but I think it's an important one. And that is that the state must not simply, like, for it to be a state, as far as anarchists consider it, and I think history and anarchist movements has borne me out on this, it must not only possess a monopoly over the justified use of force, but it must also be a hierarchical institution.
Okay.
Yeah, because if you don't have that little caveat on it, I think you run into a problem where is an anarchist militia is that a state?
Yeah. I think that qualification helps address my earlier comment about a community enforcement mechanism. You would say that's not hierarchical, but they might have a monopoly on violence, but they're not a state. So I think that helps address that worry of mine.
But sorry, I'm just telling somebody we got somebody here. I want to answer this, by the way, really quickly. So this from Likely Lad. Hey, I unfortunately missed the Kickstarter campaign. Will you sell some of the Daruti special offers again in the future? So Likely Lad, yes. So, by the way, this is totally sidetracking you here, Socrates Memes. So I'm going to go very quickly. So the new comic series that I'm doing, historical fiction about the life and death of anarchist Buenaventura Durruti, who's one of the greatest heroes of the Catalan Civil War, of the Spanish Civil War, and led an army of between 6,000 and 10,000 anarchists to go battle Franco. I just recently had a Kickstarter up to fund the creation of that series. It is funded. If you want to get a copy of the first issue, there is a link in the description. Just go to the link. You can order one. You can pre-order it ahead of time. That's still available. And I will be launching its own special backer kit if you want to get like the prints or some of the other stuff that I made to kind of celebrate the series and reward people for helping us paint Durruti's name across the sky. So yeah, that's to you, likely lad. And I'm now Socrates. You can continue.
Thank you. And I don't know if I deserve the honor of being called Socrates, but understood. So I guess just to kind of return to my initial two-prong issue here, and we were discussing kind of defining anarchy in such a broad way that it becomes Spinozian, as we said. Yeah. When we get to this unjust hierarchy point, I think that's where this really becomes the strongest to me, because when I hear people talk about unjust hierarchies, in my mind, that feels compatible with political liberalism. Like I think you could say, and I know the word liberal is a bunch of red flags for anarchists.
That's all right. But, no. I think I know where you're going with this, but continue.
Yeah. So when I say liberal, I mean like Rawlsian liberalism, which is what I consider myself, which is that, we have a very basic structure behind the veil of ignorance. The difference principle, these open institutions for all, which are both completely compatible with anarchy, I would assume. I guess the difference principle, we could discuss force there, but what I hear here is that you could say, like, you could have a democratic system, a liberal democracy, where all hierarchies are just. It's direct democracy. It's this representation system that people said we put the experts in charge and all of that. Like, so am I missing something there, or where am I going there?
So say the end of that really quickly. I got distracted by a cat in the chat saying that most anarchists oppose democracy, which is not the case at all. Right. But I don't want to get distracted by the chat. So could you just say the last part again one more time?
Sure. Yeah. So this liberal democracy, you could have a system that I would consider to say these hierarchies are not unjust. You have the people that get together and they vote in these representatives that are experts, that are qualified, and that they've delegated authority to on the basis of their votes. To me, that doesn't seem unjustified. It seems like a just hierarchy because these are qualified people we've appointed. And I've heard anarchists say they're okay with a system like that. So where's the incompatibility here?
I think first off, I would say that like anarchism in a way, and I actually made this point in my debate with David D. Friedman, in a way, anarchism is actually an extension of liberalism. As much as we hate liberalism and crap on liberals all the time, because nobody likes a fence sitter.
Right.
Like like the ideals of liberalism, the equality, fraternity, liberty, these are all very important ideals to anarchists. And we see liberalism as having failed at this project and in fact being incapable of actually realizing these ideals in real life. And thus we need to go further, hence anarchism. As a theory, because essentially what we're trying to do is bring about the most equal, fair, and just and fraternal society that we can have. You've got.
Well, I was just going to
say. So if I can be like a nerd for a second here, you got the anarchist circle A behind me. The A with the O around it. The implication being anarchy is the mother of order. So I would say that the problems, there are specific ways in which liberal institutions are built and power is transmitted through society in a physical way, and like the web of human connections that are inherent to liberal republics that make it impossible for liberalism to deliver on its promises, and thus we need something else. And that's where you get into anarchist philosophy. But I'm sorry, continue. You had a response.
It was more of a question, and I just, because when I'm hearing you, I'm not hearing any contradiction between. And I often say this to communists I discuss as well about how Rawls is compatible with communism. in the sense that like he doesn't dictate a capitalist system in theory of justice. And so what I'm hearing here is not necessarily still incompatible with liberalism. I'm hearing you say it's incompatible with this current neoliberal system, but it still sounds like anarchism is this broad enough term if you permit these just hierarchies to still have this liberal democracy so I guess my question is, just to stop rambling and ask you the question, is which exact aspect of liberalism, the philosophy, is just not sufficient to satisfy the demands of anarchists?
I would say the two biggest ones would be the existence of the state and private property. And these two are inherently tied together. I would say currency also to a certain extent, though that's not all anarchists. So I really think it's the state and private property. And I have to define these. Now, I've already defined the state as the monopoly on violence, the hierarchical group of armed men. And then I'm going to define private property. And this is really, really important. Like, I tried to get this across in my debate with Stefan Molyneux. He didn't get it. He couldn't get it.
Just to preempt this, I am familiar with the distinction in personal and private property and such. So I'm not going to push back too hard on that. But
okay,
go ahead.
Good. So, and again, I define this in a slightly different way than oftentimes you hear. There's a little more nuance to it, or it's actually a little bit simpler, because a lot of the distinction between like private and personal property, and if you ask a lot of socialists this, not just anarchists, they'll talk about the property being productive or large. And this is sadly a little vague. Like, it's hard to draw like a good and hard. So and the reason they do that, by the way, is anarchism and socialism is rooted in the workers' movement. So, they're talking about stuff related with like productive property that generates income and stuff like that. But I don't think that's a good way to think about it.
Okay.
What you want to think about it instead is imagine a stateless society. And by that, I mean, imagine a society where there is no military and police. And for the ANCAPs and libertarians and the others, there's also no private security firms. Right. There is no group of armed men that can come in and, enforce laws. There's only, at most individual or community level violence that could be done to enforce something. So imagine that these institutions do not exist. Now, think about not what the law tells you can own, or what custom tells you can own, but what can you really own, like in practice, if there is no state? Well, you can own your home because you live in it, you occupy it, maybe you have a shotgun or whatever. The property that you use every day. What you can't own, interestingly enough, is someone else's home, because they live there and they actually have it in their possession and control it. So the only way you could extract rent from someone living in a different house is if that person voluntarily decided that it was a good idea to pay you that rent, and that they genuinely wanted to for some strange reason. So similarly, could you own a business? Well, yes, you could own the business that you as sole proprietor work on, and maybe you and your friends together could own a small business altogether that you all work on. But can one person or a small group of people own Amazon against the wishes of the people who work at Amazon? You can't, because there's no police force to call in and say, they're on the deed, throw these people out on the streets, lock them up. So this is what's really, really important here. So the reason why I'm talking about this with regard to the state and private property is, how did the state form and what purpose does it serve within society? And you can read, David Graeber's Debt, the First 5,000 Years, where he talks about the foundation of the first states within the Fertile Crescent. And we find that, and it wasn't just David Graeber, but, you get these ideas from John Locke in Second Treatise on Civil Government. You get them from Adam Smith. The great and chief end of men uniting into commonwealths and putting themselves under government is the preservation of their property. So a core aspect of the state is it's a group of armed men that forms together to secure and defend valuable property.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now here's the thing about the state, and this is why the hierarchical aspect of it becomes very, very important. So if you have a hierarchical group of armed men that exists to secure and defend valuable property, obviously those men will have commanders. If you have an army, you must have generals. And those generals give the orders and the army follows it. Now, the orders that those generals give towards the protection of property cannot possibly be a true expression of the will of the masses within that society. They can only be a true expression of the will of the people that those generals know and care about. So the police chief can't listen to everyone in New York City. He can only listen to his immediate superiors and, the high up elites. So essentially what you have happen with regard to when a state structure exists to secure and defend valuable property, it makes the pretense of existing for everyone to keep the peace, but rather the peace is kept in order to keep the property, and the property is kept not for the whole of society, but actually for a very small group of elites that command the state. And direct its violence. And therefore, because of this particular relationship and just the way human brains work and the way we take in data, and you can talk about how classes form, what we have is not a sort of technocratic state that serves the people, and we have attempts to do this, but really what we have is an informal oligarchy backed up by force. And so, like, because by virtue of this particular human machine, these particular, institutions that we have built through no fault of any actors outside of them, and I mean, there may be evil people that run the state, there may be good people that run the state. It doesn't matter. What matters is that what does the machine do? And what the machine does is secures and defends valuable property for elites. And everything else that it does is simply towards that purpose.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense as a way that I would say liberalism could be incompatible then. So that helps me answer that, because I think property, a defense of property probably is inherent in liberalism.
Well, defense of property is inherent in any human system.
But state defending property. Yeah.
Defense of private property, of the private, large, productive property of elites is what's inherent in liberalism.
So actually, and can we focus in on that? Because this gets to my other part of the fork, which I know is a played out objection to anarchy that I know everyone would make.
That's all right. I've heard them all.
Yes. So, but this, I just have not been convinced by any anarchists I've talked to. When you say stuff like, here's what people can do, here's what they can't do. Are you saying that is going to be enforced by the community? Are they going to be in communes that enforce these? Like, how does that in your system? How does that work? How does that enforcement work?
I mean, it works on the local level. However people want to organize themselves, they will organize themselves for defense. So, like communes, and this is very interesting because a lot of people will always they go to talk to a communist, and they're like, "Oh, you can have your communes," and I'm like, "Dude, communists don't live in communes. Right. It is a completely different form of that's communalism." And so like the in communism does not refer to communes. It refers to common property, as in different types of property. So you have private property, as we understand in socialist philosophy, which is absentee property that the owner does not own, and does not possess, but is possessed and used by someone else on their behalf, and this relationship is created by the state. Public property, which is property supposedly owned by everybody, really owned by the state, and usually made accessible to most within society in one way or another. Then you have personal property, your home, your toothbrush, your car, your fields that you plow yourself. And then you have common property, which is in our current society, that is like the air or international waters or language. Now, human custom and law can change property types. Donald Trump tried to patent the word "you're fired," to take it from common.
He probably tried to trademark it.
Yeah, I'm sorry, trademark it. Yeah. That.
But let me just back. Let me revise what I was saying. When I said commune, that was probably imprecise language. I more meant like your locality, your local, whatever your local community is.
Yeah, I mean, what the rules are going to be with any group of people are going to be decided by that group of people. And we can build out from there. So if people decide to freely associate themselves with others, they're going to come to some sort of agreement. If there's problems, ideally you get together, you talk it out in a general assembly, and either the problems are overcome and people come to it either through consensus process or some other form. They could, I suppose, write themselves a constitution if they wanted to, for instance. I have difficulty on how such a thing would be really enforced beyond the people in that community. But they could do it. So they could govern themselves and have any customs they personally want within that society, so long as enough people agree on it.
Okay, so so just to be clear, when you say like what people can and can't do with their property, that is wholly contingent on what they, as a group, agree to, right? So you could have so I know this is going to sound tongue-in-cheek, but I mean, you could have a group, this community that has this capitalist system just among that group, and that's still anarchistic then?
Kind of. I mean, that's sort of like, so this is, I'm a huge nerd. And when I was younger, I used to LARP, and I loved going to like Renaissance festivals, and like David D. Friedman, like he was like a SCA guy, which is one of the things I think is really cool about him. So like, if you think about feudalism, society has moved on from feudalism to capitalism and liberal democracy. Hobbyists may get together. You may get a cult that decides they want to start pledging like giving fealty to some guy who's built himself a castle and trading protection in his castle for like plowshares and shit. But like, that's not an economic system. That's a bunch of people LARPing, So like, I mean, you could have that in the sense that, you could have a commune where everyone dominated by communists or anarchists within a capitalist society that lives in a different way, a subculture different from the rest of society, but that wouldn't change the economic or political paradigm for that society beyond the lives of the people directly involved.
Got it. And so then I'll move on to another point I brought up that I just mentioned your thoughts on. I mean, and I got a lot of response to this, so I'm familiar with responses, but I'm still curious about what you would have to say. I often get hung up on this intergroup disputes, and one group upriver from another group using the water, polluting the water, and the downriver group is upset and wants to resolve this. Is your solution there the General Assembly and just kind of talk it out? And what do you do if one of the groups just is intransigent?
So usually what would happen there first, there would be a General Assembly where both groups would meet and talk. And if that doesn't work, there's sort of two ways you can go. You can go to the larger society and try to contact other groups and be like, hey, these guys are, shitting in the water. And I think a lot of us are downriver from this. Maybe we should talk to them and do something about it. And then the other option is direct action, which would be, anything from a protest to, whatever kind of tactics that these anarchists could come up with to try to levy force against these people. The difference is there's just not a state. Now, for instance, the other communities, it could get so bad, depending, let's say it's a cult. Let's say it's a violent cult that is polluting the water because they believe that everyone should drink strychnine. It could go as far as this group and the other group deploying militias You know, and you might have something that looks a little like military conflict. And, you know, we saw this with regard to the, you know, anarchist militias in Catalonia and the Argonne Front. The difference is that these are non-hierarchical military-esque structures. And thus they're not responding to orders from elites. They're responding to the will of the community.
Okay, so hierarchical in this example, because when I hear hierarchical, I'm thinking you are using weapons and imposing your force on me without my consent. And you're saying that's not hierarchical because we, as I don't know how, let's say there's this one cult and then 90% of the people around them have used their militias otherwise. So because 90% of people want something and only 10% don't, it's no longer hierarchical. Is that what you're saying?
So hierarchy is not simply about using force. It's not simply about using force or violence or coercion of some kind. Like hierarchy is a structure that it is a structure of command and obedience within human institutions. So yeah, a non-hierarchy, and there would probably be some form of hierarchy within these militias. Like if you look at the Spanish militias, like if you read Homage to Catalonia with Orwell, now he wasn't with the anarchists, he was with the POUM, which was a left Marxist, former Trotskyist organization. You know, he attained like the rank of corporal right before he got shot in the neck. Read the book or go and watch my series on it. You know, but like more or less everyone drew the same pay. If you wanted to go walk up to the general, slap him on the back and ask him what he's doing tonight and bum a cigarette, that's fine. Like there is perhaps an element of rank that could exist, but it's different from like, it's the difference of like, I guess the kind of rank that one might experience within a small community, as opposed to the difference in rank between like a private and like a 5-star general.
Got it. I'm not fixated on the hierarchy within these militias. It just seems to me that when you have this, I don't know how many like communities you have together. I'm going to say 10 again. So you have these 10 communities all near each other, and 9 of them are subjugating one of them to their will and saying, you need to do this at the barrel of a gun because we have decided you should. I don't get how that wouldn't be hierarchical in the same sense of a military commander, like giving commands to someone below him. What is disanalogous there?
I mean, I see what you're saying with that you could consider that use of force. And if that community is perpetually being abused by the 9 communities around it, that's a really serious problem. But also, I think that, you know, you're going to that kind of situation can, I guess, happen, and maybe it's something that's somewhat endemic of human nature. But the difference is, again, as you involve more people within the decision-making process, the people in those communities motivated by compassion and understanding are going to break rank, and more of them are going to break rank, and you won't be able to control them as much. So let's say the violent cult, their leaders have been, you know, dealt with in one way or another, maybe some sort of
I do get worried
jails or whatever.
Jump in here. I get worried about the violent cult example because I don't want to make it sound like this is some absurd hypothetical that rarely happens. I do think people have legitimate property disputes constantly, and it's not that one group is evil and one's not. It's just that people have different desires and wants. So I just
fair enough. So okay, we'll put this into more neutral terms, which actually makes it easier. So let's say there's a group of people on one side of the river and a group of people on the other side of the river. And the group of people on the other side of the river have alliances, we'll say, with 9 other larger groups, and thus have been able to kind of, you know, sublimate the people of the group on the other side.
Right.
The thing is that ultimately, there isn't much of a difference between these groups other than the fact that they choose to associate with each other. There's no national borders. There's no real racial ideas, because these things are, you know, totally rejected by anarchist philosophy, assuming this is an anarchist society.
Well, I was going to just to qualify that, you ideally they wouldn't have these things, but again, it's up to the community.
It could, it could happen. But like the point is that like the distinctions have been more or less leveled. So you don't have a hierarchical institution that deploys violence that is under the command of elites. And so what you're going to get as this group abuses the other group is you're going to have people within that group and within the other groups, or perhaps other unrelated groups, see this and come to the aid of the people who are being abused.
Well, I don't want to say abuse, because I'm worried that it's misconstruing this hypothetical that I'm thinking of. I'm genuinely thinking of
dominate,
incompatible. I mean, dominate. I mean, because they have incompatible uses, and one group upriver wants to do something with it that is legitimate. Like, people have legitimate differences of what they want to do with the world and property, and they have these legitimate disagreements about what should be done. So I don't know. So in this example, will you have these majority groups that are saying, "Hey, we don't like what you're doing"? You're going to have people. So does that make sense? I can keep going, but I think you understand. Okay.
Yeah, no, I totally get it. By the way, somebody did ask if we take questions from the chat. Feel free to fire in some super chats if you guys want to, and maybe we'll find some time to take questions. Either me and Socrates haven't really talked about it, but we'll kind of play that by ear. So if you guys want a super chat, I'll make sure that we talk about it. It maybe not right away, but towards the end of the discussion. So. Yeah. I'm sorry, I got derailed there. I mean, my point is that it's more likely that people will break rank, and that, like, whatever situation happens, even if that situation is unjust, it is less likely to be unjust and less likely to get out of hand, simply because there are more people involved in the decision-making process, and power has been spread more evenly over more hands than it would be in our society.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sympathetic to that view. I mean, the reason I consider myself a liberal in the Rawlsian sense is I think people have legitimate differences and desires in the world, and if they work together, that, I mean, behind the veil of ignorance or within society, they can come to some agreeable resolution. So that all makes sense to me. It's just that, and this gets back to my original point, that once we start defining these things to say that, hey, no, like, these groups can force this other group to follow their will at the barrel of a gun, I start to think, well, then what is how much work is the term anarchy doing? It sounds to me like that's not.
Well, but hang on, you're actually doing the Spinoza's God thing again. Okay, but you're doing it from the other direction, because you're saying any introduction of any level of violence or coercion undoes the whole project of anarchy. When what I would really say in this situation is, ideally, I think it would be a great thing if we lived in a society where no one could impose violent will on.
Sure, I agree.
Period. Yeah, but that's simply not reality. So the idea is it's not a game of a perfect solution. It's a game of minimizing it. In much the same way as it's not a game of, like, anarchism doesn't mean you get to do whatever you want to do at all times, but the idea is that you maximize individual freedom, by essentially destroying and breaking up large concentrations of power.
So I mean, that all makes sense to me. So I guess now let me just recite my liberal tendencies here, and how that's, again, I guess I'm coming back to the whole this is compatible notion.
Okay, nerd.
So I mean, I when I'm hearing you speak here, I'm thinking, I think that there's disputes are inevitable, and people have different desires. And I keep saying this, and wants, and it's just true. And people want different things out of their life and with the world. We want to maximize them achieving those ends in a way that's not incompatible or violent with someone else. And that's what Rawls would say, and that's what a liberal would say. And so I think the best way to do that is to then get together, maybe through a representative body, maybe through direct democracy, and create these rules that society then enforces. And they might have people that they hire to enforce those rules, because some people aren't going to follow them, and you need some mediator to adjudicate issues. And then I brought this dispute resolution point in my comments. I think that's one of my other big points here, which is you need this dispute resolution process, which to me seems inherently hierarchical. And how do you resolve these disputes? And that's through a hierarchy. Maybe that's a democratic hierarchy, which I support, but I'm wondering what you would say there.
Well, so first off, there's a couple of issues here. I think the idea of professional law enforcement and professional property protection is inherently problematic.
So let me revise it, not necessarily say property protection, but rule enforcer. Maybe it's not about private property, but they're saying like, hey, this is a communal park. We have rules about what can be done here. You can't burn the grass. We need someone to enforce that.
Yeah. But again, I'm not sure that that should be a profession that someone does as their career. And the reason why I think is rather, like before the rise of police forces in the United States, formalized police forces, like they existed so formalized police in the North arose out of mercenaries.
Yeah.
It was private security paid for by capitalists and they found this was incredibly expensive and corrupt. Oftentimes the police officers were, in cahoots with the thieves and were getting a cut of the stuff that was stolen. And so the business owners all got together and said, hey, this is too expensive. Let's offload it on the taxpayer. And you got the formation of the Boston Police. That was the first policing in the North. In the South, the first group of like official police was like post-Civil War, like it was slave catching organizations that were then rolled over into police post-Civil War, and that's why you have incredibly messed up police in the South, both in the South and the North. But
I'm not going to stand here and defend the American police structure. I just want to be clear about that.
Sure. No, and I'm not bringing that up so that to put you in the position to defend it. But what I'm saying is that before these police institutions arose, most communities functioned on the constabulary system, where people were appointed within the community to be the rule enforcer for a period of time, and then somebody else was appointed. And it was on a rolling basis. And, there were problems, but, without this massive institution, it worked. It worked, perfectly fine. So I would prefer to see something like that. I think we should look to stuff like the constabulary system for anarchist police, if we are to say that.
That sounds fine with me. I'm not necessarily saying it has to be a career for life that we're hiring these people for. But I'm still saying we need to have a system. At least I'm not saying we need to. Mm-hmm. With this ideal of maximizing liberty, reducing disagreement, what I would assume and what I think is the way to do that is come together, create rules, and have certain people enforce those rules and have dispute resolution systems to deal with that. And those might be a lot of rules, and you might need a lot of people enforcing it because, again, I'm a lawyer. Mm-hmm. I'm used to a lot of rules. I understand how complicated society is. So I think a lot of people fall back on, we'll have these simple rules, we can have some community enforcement agents, but like, let's say there are cars in the system. There are a lot of rules when it comes to driving and products liability and how do you make cars safe and OSHA and and I think they're all good rules. I
will point something out though. It's interesting that you brought up cars, for instance, because like jaywalking was never a thing. Jaywalking was invented by the car companies.
I'm not saying every rule is like that, just to be clear.
Certainly not. This is a minor point that leads to a larger point is what I'm getting at. So like, for instance, we're in a situation where there are, one of the biggest killers of biggest killer of police officer before COVID was car crashes. And one of the biggest killers of people in the world are and especially in the United States, are car crashes. Well, why is that happening? Well, it's because the car companies, because they were interested in profits and private security, because they were interested in profits, went and bought up land that had, trolley things on it and destroyed them and made certain that the mode of transportation within the United States would not be rails primarily, it would be cars.
Yeah. When I brought up cars as an example here, I was I am a big fan of transit and green alternatives. I don't want to imply that this society has to have cars.
Certainly, but the reason you're bringing it up, and my point here is that I think Noam Chomsky said this because somebody asked him about anarcho-capitalism, essentially, and like free market capitalism, and could you have stateless capitalism? He essentially said, well, stateless capitalism did exist. It existed, throughout, most of the third world. A lot of the time in the third world, it exists now. I would actually point to stateless capitalism existing during the age of heroic commerce, when the British East India Company and the Dutch East India Company operated outside of their country's borders with no oversight, ran things the way that they wanted to. And, like British East India Company starved 10% of the Indian subcontinent to death in a single year. Like, it was monstrous. But the point is that, like, Chomsky said essentially is that no society will ever develop into anarcho-capitalism. No society will develop into free market libertarianism, because the people that win at that game of properties will seize the levers of power and make sure that, and build institutions to protect themselves and protect what they have gained, essentially. So, we can talk about rules and setting some, community guidelines and stuff, and having those defended by members of the community, but we simultaneously have to be ever vigilant against people essentially putting on airs and gaining more property and power than others, who then use that property and power, and oh my, it snowballs. And now, Jeff Bezos is launching himself into space while most of the country is getting evicted.
Totally. No, right. And so I think that the best way to avoid that is more rules. I know it sounds like I'm just a typical lawyer, but I mean, I'm seeing society craft these rules around property to stop that from happening, stop this accumulation of wealth. You have rule after rule, and you have these tomes of treatises and rules, which is the best way to stop these things from happening, stop these disagreements. But to do so, you have to have a hierarchy of adjudication and enforcement.
Certainly, but you're a lawyer, so I'm sure you're familiar with legal realism.
Yes. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. And the idea that a lot of these rulings are happening not necessarily because of what's in the laws and what's in the precedent, but what is, I guess, socially desirable for the judges and the class of people that the judges come from.
And so there are a lot of risks associated with this, and I completely recognize. That said, I guess I would turn it back to you and ask, how do you prevent these things from happening, and how do you have this dispute resolution? And these are two totally separate questions. One is more forward-looking rules to stop this accumulation of wealth. One is adjudicating actual live disputes between two people who want to do two different things. How do you deal with both of these without that issue?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a couple of attempts at this, and I'm not brilliant enough to sit down here and plan out the perfect anarchist society for you, like, in depth. But what I can say is, I think what's really important is kind of two things. It's a balancing act. And just like you were talking earlier, you said that, like, what protects the minority from the tyranny of the majority? And the answer to that is the principle of autonomy and also direct action. But similarly, like, so you have a balancing act between popular will and between, that of the individual. Similarly, I think you have to have a balancing act between rules and enforcement. And I would say the sort of positive feedback loop that happens when we start to set rules and when people start to figure out ways to game the system and pull more power to themselves. So, I think it's ironically, I'm going to quote Trotsky here, but in a way, kind of what we need is permanent revolution. And I don't mean that in the sense of like a permanent, like, freaking reign of terror kind of revolution, but it's kind of like an extension of almost the price of freedom is eternal vigilance. So you would essentially, what I would say, get a group of rule makers within society, and also get a group of people whose job it is to destroy what the rule makers make. And just set them against each other.
And just have this constant pendulum of back and forth.
Yeah. And well, not even hopefully we wouldn't want it to be back and forth. We would want it to be we don't want either group winning. We want, like, you've got
checks and balances, you might say.
Exactly. Right. I mean, really, that's, take the American system and extend it out and actually make it fulfill on its promises, actually have the checks and balances, aside from having this kind of gesture in the direction of checks and balances, but really it's just window dressing for the powerful.
Right. Okay. So I think I understood what you were saying, I still don't feel like I understood the answer to my at least adjudication question about two people having a dispute. The third party needs to settle it. Is that a just hierarchy? Is that not a hierarchy at all? How are we doing that?
I mean, what I would say is, like, with a dispute resolution, conflict resolution, like if that was to happen in Occupy Wall Street, you take it to the GA. I think similar things would happen, like within the Iroquois Confederacy. You took it to the elders. They talked it out. Is there some hierarchy in that? I don't know, maybe. But again,
like I mean, you might say it's a just hierarchy, but elders, the whole system of elders sounds like hierarchy.
Yeah.
In a sense.
Yeah, but also, like, what's the level of hierarchy there? And also, by the way, once you're an elder, you're not going to be an elder very much longer because you're just going to die. So, like, if there's some hierarchy inherent in that, sure. The game wouldn't be to eliminate it. The game would be to minimize it and to make it work for us, I think.
Yeah, no, of course. And I think that's kind of been the refrain from our discussion so far, which is that, and I'm sure there are anarchists who disagree. I've never met two anarchists who agree with each other and everything, but I mean,
it was hurting cats.
yeah. So, but I mean, like, in that makes sense to me as a response, and it at least deals with my big issue here, which is like it collapses into but that's helpful.
And what I also might recommend, if you are interested in like how anarchist societies have gone about resolving disputes, I would highly recommend, because there is a wealth of actual anarchist societies that have existed and done this. I would recommend you look into the history of the Catalan anarchists during the Spanish Civil War. I'd recommend you look at the Ukrainian anarchists during and granted, this is active war zone, so obviously it'll be different than a peaceful society, but the Ukrainian anarchists during the Ukraine Free Territory. For longer example, look at the Zapatistas in Chiapas. I mean, they've been doing their thing since the 90s, and currently the PKK YPG in Syria, and Maury Bookchin's Democratic Confederalism, where Maury Bookchin is like, he says he's not. He used to be an ANCOM like myself. He says he's not anymore, and he's doing his own Democratic Confederalism thing. I say, okay, fine, close enough. You're still an anarchist, in my opinion. So there are institutions in those societies that I would recommend you look at and read about, and that may help feed this curiosity.
And I do want to say, I should have said this at the outset, I am not saying that anarchist societies are impossible and that they don't exist. And
good, because they do, and they're definitely not impossible.
So I would never say otherwise, because they literally descriptively do exist. And so I believe that they can be great societies. It's when we start extending it further globally, nationally. I mean, that's when that's when my concern really kicks in. And my ideal system would be one in which, if people don't want to live like that, or people do want to live like that, they can choose to do so. And so I mean, to me, that is a liberal democracy, in a sense. You can have your anarchist societies within that ideal.
Oh, no, you can't.
Okay, you can't. You just said that they do exist in this world.
I mean, they do exist in this world, but like, okay, so where have we seen anarchist societies exist? And like, it's when the state loses power. So they're existing in because you talk about larger scale. Then granted, we haven't had like whole anarchist countries. We could have if a few cards had fallen differently during the Spanish Civil War. But like, the Catalan anarchists collectivized the entire city of Barcelona and the entire surrounding Argonne front. That's at least the regional level. And they ran it on an anarchist model for 3 years after defeating the fascists, and they held the line until they were suppressed by the Stalinists in the name of military discipline and winning the war. And then the Stalinists promptly lost the war. You look at the Ukrainian anarchists, very similar story. Not quite as long lived, but I mean, like Nestor Makhno, we might not even have had a USSR if Nestor Makhno had not been around, because he dealt like the final blows against the White Army were pretty much done by Nestor Makhno, and then betrayed by Bolsheviks again, and was forced to flee to Paris, where he met Buenaventura Durruti, which will happen in issue 2 of my Durruti comic book. Sorry, couldn't resist that. The Zapatistas, now they control their territory and have been doing it for quite a while, but they were like immediately attacked by the Mexican government. And I think one of the only reasons why, they weren't crushed by these statists, beyond the fact that they're mountain folk, and it's very difficult to control mountain folk, as the United States has learned in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
But also because, world communication the world's eyes were on Mexico, and they were going to have a hard time taking care of these rebellions in the genocidal way that they used to. You look at Rojava, what's his face? Erdogan absolutely hates the PKK YPG, and tried his best to wipe them out the second Donald Trump, like a freaking moron, pulled out the American troops that were embedded with them. But that society still maintained, and they're still there. They're still holding on. The dream of a new world, building a new world within the shell of the old, is still there. But like the incentive structures and the economic system of capitalism will not allow anarchists to live and function the way that we want to within a capitalist society. There will be pretense. And there will be lip service towards it, but the real ability to do it is practically not there.
So I hear you there. And the issue that comes up with me, and I'm going to use your term now when I say there's a balance to be had, because I think there's plenty of people who don't want to live maybe the way you want to live. And I would love a system that allows both people to live the way they want to. And I think an anarchist would agree with that. So in my utopian liberal democracy, if you can call it utopian, it is a system like, let's say, this is far from reality, but pretend a city in the United States wanted to become an anarchist city. They want to be an anarchist system. Yeah. My ideal liberal democracy would allow that and say that's your locality. You can do that, and we have federal rules that maybe govern basics, like you can't subjugate anyone to slavery and so on. But and that's all. You'll still have to send someone to this federal Congress or whatever to legislate federal rules, but you can do what you want to do with your in your own locality. Yeah. So, but it sounds to me like you're saying that they just can't live the way they want to live there.
So here's the problem, and I'm going to move on because we got a super chat, so I do want to bring that up in just a minute. So Carlos, hold on, we will get to you. All right, so the issue here again is capitalism. Now, and this is one of the things that like a lot of people don't understand about capitalism. Capitalism as a system, it emerged in England, in the late 1700s, early 1800s, and kind of metastasized. It formed more or less organically, but like really kind of one of the core aspects of capitalism is the fact that it relies on speculative investment in technology for profit, for markets. Like that, that's why everybody makes a big deal out of the stock market. That's why, for instance, the British East India Company was such a huge thing, and why it did as many of monstrous things that it did, because people in England were investing money in it. They didn't know what it was doing. They just saw, I give you this money in, this more money comes out. Yay, wonderful, good for me. And, they're running around the world, colonizing and obliterating these other nations and starving them to death. So the people in England who gave to that system, had they known, I think would have been horrified, but they just didn't. And similarly, like, there's a lot of ugliness, sort of the iron hand, the iron fist beneath the invisible hand. Capitalism as a system requires infinite growth, in the sense that out of all of those investments that go into the stock market, those have to be paid back. The majority of them, not all of them, but the majority of them have to bear fruit. These people have to put their money in, need to see a higher return out. And if that slows or stops, you get an economic crash, and paychecks bounce, the entire economy grinds to a halt, suicides go through the roof. A lot of people are kept on the edge of poverty, so they can't afford, an unforeseen $500 expense. And so everybody starts screaming to get this financial system going again. And that means that this system must constantly be harvesting and tapping new resources. It must constantly be expanding and finding new markets. It cannot respect borders. It cannot respect people that don't want to participate. And we know that it doesn't do that because we've seen the Enclosure Acts in England, that resulted in peasants who had farmed this land for generations having it taken away from them and given to landowners so that the peasants could be forced into cities to serve as a workforce. We've seen the theft of the Native Americans' lands by more colonizers, by frontiersmen, by people going out with regard to the Homestead Acts, again, so that the country could expand, so that the markets could continue to grow and continue to get stronger and bigger and to see a larger return on these investments to avoid this terrifying crash that we see building up. And this leads to environmental devastation and human rights abuses. And so, I mean, there may be some nice people, but when the rubber hits the road, are they going to respect anarchist sovereignty? No, they're going to do everything in their power to open a new markets to sell to and to get new workforces to work for them. And they're going to try to make sure that they get those workforces at the cheapest possible, cheapest possible dollar. So I don't think that international capitalism and international finance, or even national capitalism or national finance, because it's the same thing, just on different scales, it cannot respect human rights.
Let me just make one more clarification, kind of just state my point. I'll give you the final word before we get to the I don't know, was it the super comment? I agree with some of what you said, and I want to distinguish between my substantive normative beliefs and what science should look like, which I agree that that's all terrible, and my ideal system would prevent that. And I actually think as an empirical matter, you can, if you did it right, restrain capitalism. I'm a social democrat. I'm not. So I mean, I believe it can be restrained to a degree.
You're a baby.
So I know. So, but I know you disagree with that. But so I'm just going to throw that one out there. And I want to distinguish what my substantive goals with my procedural ones, which is that when I say this liberal democracy I support, I agree that could happen, and I would really not like it to happen, and I would push against it. The issue is because of my beliefs that people have such varying different beliefs, I need to create a system that they can express their different beliefs and give them that outlet. And if they do these horrible things, that sucks, and they shouldn't. And I want to stop it. Yeah, but I don't want to structure society a priori in such a way that just stops them from doing it without subjugating them. And just to me, I mean, yeah.
I understand the principle there that you're going for. I think it's very laudable. I think this is sort of verging on Karl Popper's paradox of tolerance.
Yes.
So we can be tolerant of everything except those who are intolerant, and in much ways, we can be, we can be tolerant towards those except for those who try to climb higher and seize more for themselves. It's really because the problem really is one of scale, and it's very hard to draw a distinction. The fallacy of the beard or how many grains of sand make a pile.
The vagueness, the Socrates paradox.
It's not possible to really give a hard, fast line for a rule to when you get to this point, which again is why I think it needs to be more of a process of society as opposed to necessarily a rule. I'm not opposed to rules. Anarchy very famously means no rulers, not no rules.
Yes.
I am skeptical of them just because of a lot of the time I view the law kind of as a blunt instrument. And oftentimes there's rules of unintended consequences. And then also you get into situations where powerful and influential individuals get climbed to such heights in society that they get to basically rewrite the laws as they see fit or completely flout them. Great example being, Donald Trump. I mean,
sure. Yeah. So, no, I'm not going to disagree with you there.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think, in my opinion, the goal here is to distribute power as evenly as possible among as many hands as possible. So if we think of a power vacuum, imagine a literal vacuum as a stand-in for the power vacuum. It gets plugged usually by historically by several very large boulders, essentially by monarchy or senates and presidents and kings and all that stuff. My idea is we take those and we just pound them down into pebbles or maybe sand, and get it to a point where each piece comes in and we all block each other, to where we have maximized our liberty on the individual and collective level, and we prevent anyone from imposing themselves upon society. We prevent bullies from rising.
Yeah.
And it will require ideology. It will require work. But I think that that's really like, if we're looking to build a society that pushes human flourishing, that allows for human flourishing, that allows for liberty, equality, and fraternity, and also, gets us into a position where we can live in tune with the world rather than trying to master it and destroy it like we are currently with global warming. I think that should be the project of civilization. And at least right now, I think the anarchist political and philosophical tradition is the one that holds the most promise for eventually bringing that out.
Yeah, and I'll just end by saying that I don't think my substantive goals are wildly different from these, and I think these are laudable goals, and I actually, again, my critique of anarchism mostly comes down to this more procedural, practical, but I think that's a great goal. I'll just say that.
Awesome. Yeah. And like I said, there's a lot of moving parts here and a lot of things to be done. But I think you and I, what I really like about this is I think you and I have the same principles. I think ironically, you may be a little more idealistic than me. At least when it comes to our faith in institutions. I think maybe I may have a little bit more faith in people, and
I think liberals can be utopian in their like of institutions as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, great. So are we at an end here? Do we want to go to the super
chat?
Yeah,
that sounds good to me.
Okay, we only got one in, and it was awesome. So thank you very much. Awesome because he gave me $20, and I'm happy about that. But it's from Carlos Costa. I haven't read it yet. So why don't you read this out loud, and then we'll both answer it.
Sure. It says, violence is a part of all societies. We will still need institutions to maintain social order and intermediate conflicts. These institutions will be controlled by the community as a whole. They are not hierarchically imposed.
Yes, I got worried when I saw violence as a part of all societies. I was like, oh, is this some weirdo fact? But no, I think he's 100% on the mark there.
Yeah, and I think I agree with most of it as well. Actually, I think the hierarchically opposed enforced by the community, I think there tends to be some conflation there, and that's where I get kind of concerned and kind of like, where are we going with these words? But I think the intent I'm behind.
Yeah, absolutely. And, like we should do another one of these streams, because there are I have some issues and some fears about anarchist implementation. And, it hasn't always gone. I mean, it's gone better than you'd think a lot of the time. But, like, we are not living in an anarchist society right now. And, the anarchists didn't win the Spanish Civil War. The fascists did, which is the worst possible outcome we could have had. Yeah. So I definitely do think we can talk about the weaknesses in the philosophy and its current attempts. By the way, so I can't pronounce that one, but these are supposedly some anarchist towns and municipalities. I'm actually not familiar. I think I'm somewhat familiar with Marne. I'm not going to even try in Spain. I didn't know about the Greek one. But also another thing you might want to look at for a great example would be the recovered factories movement in Argentina in the 90s. Okay. There's a great documentary called The Take by Naomi Klein. I think you can see it for free on YouTube. But I would highly recommend, if you're interested in, like, because essentially what this documentary is it's about in the 90s, they had like an era of like uber capitalism, where the new president came in Argentina and promised he'd bring prosperity by taking everything in the IMF's playbook and instituting all these business friendly policies at once. And the entire country was fleeced and destroyed. And so these workers, their factories were set to be sold off, but the government put like a kibosh on that. Nobody could take anything out of the country. So there's these empty factories. These workers have family to feed, even though these factories supposedly aren't profitable anymore. And they broke in, fought the cops, took it over themselves, and ran it with no bosses, and it worked out wonderfully. Like there were some problems later on, and obviously there always will be, but it's a phenomenal documentary. Another one you can look at also, if you want to see one about the Spanish Civil War, which is fascinating, is called Living Utopia, also free on YouTube. I highly recommend those two. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll check them out. I love documentaries. Yeah, no, that'd be great. I would love to talk again. I think we have this was a good discussion, and I would love to expound further.
It's great. I'm glad you took the time to talk to me. I was like, when he put out the call, I was like, oh God, is he going to get an ANCAP on there? I got to get in there.
Some guy in the comments was really pushing for an ANCAP. He posted like 10 times, and I was like, I'm not talking an ANCAP.
They really want to talk to you, and they all wear bow ties.
Yeah.
All right. So, yeah, I think this was really fun. Do you want to plug your pluggables? Where can people find you? You know, I clearly, I don't know how I followed your page, but I clearly enjoy it. And you've got a lot of followers. So,
yeah, I mean, people could follow me on Facebook at Socrates Memes. I don't make any money from this. I do this purely because I get some weird sick enjoyment from arguing with strangers on the internet. I have my own career, so I'm not really plugging anything anywhere else. Might have a board game coming out though. I should plug it at some point. I'm developing it right now, so maybe in the future I'll plug that. But I just purchased the beta. It's being shipped right now. It should be fun. That's
really exciting. You should check that. Are you planning to like fund it on Kickstarter?
I haven't decided how I'm going to go about it yet. I'm leaning towards Kickstarter, but I'm still researching that.
If you want to talk to me, I think we're friends on Facebook now. Like I've run now I've run 4 successful comics on Kickstarter, and from what I've been told, comics make a lot of money on Kickstarter, but like games are like just printing money.
Really? Okay. Well, that's good to know. I will message you on Facebook and talk about, because I've been need some help figuring out where to go here.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind engaging in some mutual aid with that.
Yes, thank you. It's a game kind of about capitalism, so you might not enjoy that aspect of it.
Yeah, hang on. I thought I had already blocked this asshole. Sorry, we had a Nazi show at the beginning of the thing. Yeah, I instantly blocked him, but then it seems like it appeared again or something. Also there was a couple of others of these that I wanted to read really quickly, even though they aren't super chats, because I saw a friend of mine. Here we go. Japan anarcho-communist. This is a good friend of mine from one of my Facebook discussion groups. I think it's more accurate to say anarchists are opposed to unjustified hierarchies opposed to all hierarchies per se. Yes, thank you. We started with that.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're like a child that wanders into the room. Yeah. You're out of your element. This we also had with Feral Thoughts. Bookchin moved away from anarchism when he realized that anarchism is opposed to democracy. No. Anarchism is democracy. It's just not liberal democracy. Because liberal democracy is not democratic enough. Okay, so this has been really cool. Do you have anything else you want to say, or because otherwise I'll
nothing from my end. I'll turn it to you. Thanks for talking with me. This was really helpful.
Yeah, this was a blast. I actually really enjoyed it. It's very nice to engage in good faith with someone who is willing and capable to actually understand what I'm talking about. Yeah. There are so many who either can't or won't, and it's intensely annoying. Like I was never going to to get StephBot to see the light, but
that's why I came to this forum. Facebook comments are terrible, and it just was not doing it for me, so I wanted to talk to someone live.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad you did. Yeah, this was a lot of fun, and please keep doing what you're doing. It seems to be a very insightful page. You guys are interested in me, so my name is Brenton Lengel. You can look me up. I'm literally the only one in the world. My website, www.brentonlengel.com. I have 2 comic series out right now. The Ringo Award nominated Snow White Zombie Apocalypse, which is exactly as badass as it sounds, but also kind of a dark fantasy, blood, sex, kung fu, and gender politics. And Durruti Shadow of the People, which is the brand new series, was famously plugged by Robert Evans of Behind the Bastards, which is so cool because now I have 100 people going down my Kickstarter commenting bastards to get a special print. This is about anarchist Buenaventura Durruti, one of the coolest people who has ever existed. Started out as a bandit bandit bank robber and kind of Robin Hood figure, radical union member, eventually tried to assassinate the Spanish king, was jailed in France, which is where my story begins, freed, And when Spain's military went fascist, he took up the defense of Barcelona and led an army of between 6,000 and 10,000 anarchists to battle Francisco Franco in Madrid.
Wow.
So that's the story that I'm going to be telling. It's Braveheart in Spain. It's so freaking cool.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. And nobody's freaking heard of this guy. Oh, gee, I wonder why. Oh, right. He makes rich people uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And also, by the way, just to be fair, he also did his stuff in not America.
Right. I was going to say that actually might be a bigger part of it. Americans are famously America-centric.
Yeah. So go into the chat. You can pre-order the comic down there. I will be running more Kickstarters, so check that out. My company, Autonomous Collective. And go, and if you haven't liked Socrates Memes, if you follow my YouTube channel, I do debates quite frequently. Most recently was against Stefan Molyneux and noted Nazi weirdo JF Garape. But like I also debate cool people like David D. Friedman, and I frequently stream with Ben Burgess. So yeah, great talking to you guys, and yeah, this has been really cool. I will catch you all later. All right.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Peace out.
Have a good night.